Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay Show. I'm excited for today's episode because it's going to kick off a little bit of a mini series that we'll present to you over the course of the next month or so. So we have with us for this mini series, Alice Shull. She's one of our elite team members on our team of virtual coaches. And in addition to coaching for Sibme, she mentors principals on site in Massachusetts. I was worried I was going to say that difficultly. She also coaches mentors in training during their year-long internship to become NAESP nationally certified mentors. She was a teacher and a principal for 42 years. Besides her passion for supporting educators in the field, she loves to travel and especially ski. Welcome here, Alice.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, Corey.
I'm excited to have you too. You and I definitely have connected many times in our conversations around engagement and just all that there is in our field around this topic and the ways that it can look and the ways to support it and the ways to measure it. So we really kind of decided that let's just let's not break up a good thing. Let's take this to the Sibme Coach Replay Show and make a mini series out of it. And what we're hoping, we've had episodes before on engagement, but this will be a nice, well-rounded look at it because there's just never enough time to talk about student engagement. So for this episode, to kick us off into this series, we're going to talk about some specific strategies that enhance student engagement. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Alice.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I want to say is that engagement is really a buzzword nowadays in education. And yet you'll see it in everything you read about education, all kinds of documents, all kinds of standards, all kinds of regulations, etc. But what is it really? What does it really, really look like? And one of the pieces about that is to think about how teachers are so pressed for time. And they are really stuck sometimes in a hole of, I have to get the content done. I don't have time to really take the time to start putting into place processes that will truly engage the students. What we will be talking about here is engagement that will allow them not only to have the students be more connected and understand the material and the concepts more effectively, but more of the students will understand the content and the materials more effectively. And ultimately, teachers will find, if they use these procedures, that they will save time because they're accomplishing more for with and for their students in the end. So let's look at the umbrella piece, which is really called 10-2. And most everyone has probably heard about this at this point in time. And it's research that says that for every 10 minutes of lecture, we need to have participants participate in at least 2 minutes of processing of some sort. Now, this can go for adults or little children. Some people say that if you're working with students who are 7 years old, for example, you might say for every 7 minutes of teacher talk, I'm not going to call it lecture in an elementary classroom anymore, we don't do that, but certainly more directed teacher talk to the students, that students then needed an opportunity of 2 minutes to process information.
Right.
So the other piece, besides this umbrella of 10-2, is the concept of chunk and chew. And that concept is really explained beautifully by Marzano in his research. He talks about the fact that participants actually will retain more, connect more, understand more, internalize more if they are doing it in small bits. So that piece of processing that is 2 minutes offers a tremendous opportunity to accomplish a lot in terms of what really works in effective instructional practice. So if you took something as simple as thinking about a telephone number And rather than looking at a stream of numbers, you look at 3 numbers, dash, and then whatever. It's easier to remember that. That's a very simplistic example, but a good one, I think, to explain the idea.
Yeah. But it's funny that you mentioned that example. My 5-year-old right now in her preschool daycare, they are today, they are learning, this week 2 of phone numbers and names. And so she said, I get to learn our phone number again today. And I said, well, can you tell me what it is? Have you memorized it yet? And she said, it starts with a 2, but I don't know. I got more learning to do. She just kind of walked off. She's super sassy. But yes, absolutely. And chunk and chew was definitely what I kind of called it. And I even called it that way with my students, right? So
Mhm.
it's time for you to kind of chew a little bit on what we're talking about here today. And I've also heard that, you know, given the age that the students are, that's kind of where we should be thinking about their attention span is somewhat equal to their age up to a certain level. But then really anybody that 10-15 minutes, even for adults, 15 minutes is a long time. Yeah.
Exactly. If we remember many times sitting in workshops and being ready to fall asleep
Hmm.
because the facilitator had lost us in the most advanced, phenomenal workshops that I've experienced lately, in some of the work that we do in leading workshops as well, that processing time is just as critical for adults. It not only keeps you from falling asleep, but it truly does. If you look back on the experience of the workshop, you'll realize that you retain more
Right. You have
by
to be able to
having.
cement it, right? Into your
Yes,
mental model.
exactly.
Even those that are exciting. And I've had those where I'm just like, I can't keep up. I am writing so many things
Anymore.
down. And if I don't turn to somebody and start
Yep,
talking, even if you're still talking, I'm gonna
yep.
lose it. So
You know what?
yeah.
Yeah, somebody, I read somewhere, somebody equated it to filling a glass of soda.
Mhm.
Um, you can only fill it so much, and then if you keep filling it, it's going to overflow, it's going to
Mhm.
implode or explode, whatever.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing with us adults. If we can think about it, put this, let us uh, step in the shoes of our students. Is
Yeah.
that very thing? It just gets to the point where we can't take any more information in
I love
without
that. And I love the
processing.
soda analogy because you're right. Like it starts to fizz and bubble and you've got to wait with your root beer for just a minute and let the
Yeah,
the bubbles go down so where you can pour a little bit more in. And what you say about, just the pacing of things, 10 and 2, I remember when I first heard that as a young teacher, I was like, what? I don't have time for that. Like, what in the world? But it really does. If I have to go back and reteach it again later on and pull more small groups because they didn't get a chance to really connect and hear it from their peers and put it in their own words, then I'm working twice as hard.
right.
So
Exactly. Exactly.
so then Alice, what's the type of a strategy that allows for this kind of processing in that chew moment? What's some strategies that you might recommend?
Okay, one of the big strategies is think, pair, share. Now, again, this is a strategy that folks have heard about, know about, think about, but oftentimes don't really implement it in a consistent way and don't implement it effectively. So those are some of the pieces we'll talk about today. The think, pair, share basically is that you allow students either to pair up or you pair them up into groups of 2 and then ask the students a question. This is just the general plan. Ask the students a question. They have a few seconds to think quietly about the response. Then they have a few minutes, depending on, to talk to each other about the response. And then finally, there's an opportunity for not necessarily every single member of a pair to speak, but many of them to share out to the entire class. Another way you can do it is think right or right think.
That's my favorite. Mm-hmm.
Share, share. And that is also can be very effective. Some people learn more effectively through writing. And so that can work even with little ones, depending on what the question is. So
Yeah.
that's the essence of think, pair, share. But the points I'd love for people to think about is what kinds of questions are we asking?
Mm-hmm.
To be really prepared. It's not just it is an easy strategy. It's not top heavy in terms of planning. But on the other hand, I would recommend that teachers prepare the questions ahead of time. Are they deep thinking questions? Are they yes, no questions? Um, are they back up the yes, no with some more thinking about the particular concept? That's the one piece that I would want folks to consider. The other piece I would want folks to consider is class management.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if students don't understand the procedure and
Right.
they don't follow the rules of the procedure will not be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another piece, and sometimes needs to be done over and over again. I've watched videos prepared of teachers who are showing the process and stop and say, we have to go backwards. We need to
Go
figure
back.
this out again,
Mm-hmm.
regarding management. So that's the second piece that I think is very important to
Yeah.
consider.
And I think both of those are monumental because, just personally, the very first video I watched of myself, which was the 9th video I had recorded, I deleted the first 8 in the first 5 seconds. So I wouldn't call those
You know
watching.
that feeling.
But 12 years ago, I noticed some things that I did well, but I also noticed some things I needed to work on, and questioning was one of them, because I was working on that 10 and 2, and I had my students kind of grouped in partners. We did a lot of talking, but what I noticed was many times, and I remember thinking as a teacher, I asked my question and I felt like Ferris Bueller's high school teacher, and I'm going, anyone, like, it's just deer in the headlights. I got some kids who are checked out, and I'm thinking, oh, they're not interested, they're not engaged, they're not with me. When I watched my video, though, that first one that I watched, I had this moment where I was like, why is it quiet? Like, let me rewind this. What just happened? Because I got quiet and there's no conversation with my students. And then I start, kind of talking again. And I realized I asked a question, but I did so in a very sloppy way. So I tended to over scaffold a lot and just throw a question in there because I'm a fast talker. And so my kids are just like, what just happened? Like, she stopped talking. Did she ask a question? What was her question? What am I supposed to do next? Am I supposed to talk to my partner? Because I didn't have my clear procedures in there yet. So video is a really powerful tool to help us
Oh,
know
yeah,
that. Yeah. But
absolutely.
my favorite is when I preferred to pair my students. And I learned this from Anita Archer and her explicit instruction, those active participation strategies, partner 1, partner 2, or
Mhm.
north, south, or red, blue, whatever, however you
Right.
want to label your partners. Because I had mine who were like me and had the gift of gab. And I had my kids who, if they didn't have to talk, they're like my husband, they won't. If it can be a one word answer, it will be one word. And so
Right.
I had to make sure that my chatty Cathys made sure that they honored the thinking time of my more quiet ones, but then also, if you're 2 and you're quiet, it's your turn to talk. So I loved having that procedure. It really helped. And then I could go back and I could very clearly see we're not following procedures. Let's rewind it a little bit. So
That's a great procedure. I really like that.
it's a good procedure.
And I think actually over time develop many different procedures. We can have partner 1, partner 2,
Mhm.
or students can get up and walk around, and when the
Mhm.
bell rings, stop in front
Mhm.
of the person who becomes your partner and do the partner share. There are a lot of different ways that will get people up, moving, and involved and engaged, which is what it's all about,
Yeah, yeah, because if they're not engaged, they're not learning, no matter how well you're teaching it.
right?
If your students aren't with you, they're not going to continue to stay with you, right? So So another concept I'd like to talk about as we talk about some of these strategies, right? The strategies, there's so many of them. A lot of them are very similar, just kind of rephrased, rebucketed, thrown in a different way. But we know that when we do these, when we have an effective strategy and we've got good questioning and we work on how we time those things out, engagement is high. But what do we mean by high levels of engagement? What's a good marker? What's a good kind of benchmark to shoot for high levels of engagement?
That's a hard one. And it's especially a hard one when we're not necessarily using anything that's quote unquote traditional ways of figuring out what students understand and what they can do. So I would say first, a gestalt feeling of what am I looking for? It's one thing to see a class involved, as I walk through classrooms as a principal, the kids would be very involved. But what were they actually engaged in was the key. So
Mm-hmm.
as basic as this sounds, walking around, if you have 20 children in your classroom or even 24 and you have 12 groups or 10 groups, you can get around to those groups and you can see whether these kids are making eye contact with one another. Or sometimes people will set a timer so that they take turns discussing whatever it is that they were asked. But you can really get a sense then, not only the one thing is, what are they learning? In terms of how are they dealing with the content or what's their
Mm-hmm.
thinking around this, but how are they really engaged with one another? And that's getting the wheels moving in their brains to really think about the topic. So I wouldn't diminish a bit walking around and getting that sense. I know as a principal, that's what I do if I really want to see what's going on in a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other thing to consider, which is a more data-ish percentage sort of a thing, is if let's just throw out the idea of RTI and let's think about 3 tiers. And um, tier 1 is generally, we're talking about 75 to 80% of the students in your class. And
Mm-hmm.
then you've got tier 2 students and you've got tier 3 students. So your expectations of what they are going to be able to achieve in terms of engagement might be somewhat different from tier to tier. But if you keep the idea of that 75 to 80%, that's what I want to see. That's my ballpark. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
would I love 100%? Oh yeah.
Right.
Am I aiming for 100%? Absolutely. Will I ultimately get it because I expect it? Probably. But I think if we're a little more realistic, we might want to think about looking at the engagement and then scaffolding to draw that engagement out of the students who are in tier 2 and tier 3. It might have to do with matching how we partner up the children.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that can be effective in supporting more engagement
Mm-hmm.
because peers are great interacting with one another for the most part, and that might work. So are there other ways to tell that the students are engaged? Well, we do find out if they're engaged by what they ultimately know about the topic.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
when they share out, if they're on topic and they've got it, then we know, oh, okay, I heard 5 children in 10 pairs speak about this particular piece. Yes, they are, I will say, yes, they are primarily engaged. If they're off topic, they're not going to be. Some of the typical things that we do at the end of a lesson. The kids don't have to be leaving for the day, but maybe just moving to another activity, and they produce maybe jointly an exit ticket.
Mm-hmm.
What did I learn? And then you can analyze that a bit later. 3, 2, 1. Again, what the kinds of things? What do we know? 3 things I really know, and
Right.
this might be a writing activity, or it might be a chart activity that's done with the whole group afterwards. Two
Mhm.
things I'm not sure about, and one thing I want to know more about. They're all different kinds of pieces, but the key is it's not the content is secondary in a sense. It sounds funny, but it is kind of a way to get at, were these kids really engaged in the activity as uh, we worked through the questions in the class.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. Like content secondary sounds kind of funny, but again, if we don't have the appropriate structures in place, if we aren't asking the right thinking prompts for them to engage in the thinking and the questioning, I may ask a high level question, but if my students' prior knowledge and the way that they've engaged with what I've presented so far is still here, they can't think up here with me yet.
Mhm.
So, um, that planning piece that you mentioned earlier and being intentional with that, I think those are really
Absolutely.
first, right? That's where we start with everything. And then again, starting to see how they're responding, what they're saying in those responses, whether it's I'm walking through and listening, or I'm looking at those exit tickets, or I'm looking at their, formative assessment for that day, can really give me further light into it. And then that helps me adjust my instruction.
Exactly, because
So
it's
yeah.
really it's both some of it is a bit summative, but a lot of it is formative because we're always looking to inform our instruction by what's
Mhm.
happening in the classroom.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's different for different children, as I said, in the tiers and so forth. But all in all, I completely agree with you. I think that's what informs our instruction
Yeah.
to move forward.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really, really great kickstart into this series on engagement. I think definitely we're going to come back and talk a little bit about some other key factors that support student engagement and making that happen, and that being authentic. Some ways to assess for that and kind of collect and be able to notice, are my students engaged? What type of engagement is it? So I'm excited for more episodes to come from you and I, Alice, on the Sibme Coach Replay Show. So thanks for being a part of our show today.
It's my pleasure.
So audience, tune in for another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay Show next week.